The most dangerous people are usually the ones who never feel the need to tell you who they used to be. On the morning Charlotte Whitmore hired a new driver, she expected another polished resume, another confident handshake, another man eager to impress the billionaire whose name appeared on magazine covers and business channels every week. Instead, a quiet black father walked through the revolving doors carrying a worn leather folder that had seen better days. Isaiah Walker's suit had been pressed with care, but the fabric had faded from years of use. His shoes were polished until they reflected the marble floor, though the leather around the toes had begun to crack. Nothing about him looked expensive. Nothing about him suggested he belonged inside Whitmore Global Headquarters overlooking downtown Chicago. Yet he walked with the calm confidence of someone who had long ago stopped measuring his worth by the opinions of strangers. The receptionist barely looked up before asking him to take a seat with the other applicants. Around him sat former executive chauffeurs, retired limousine drivers, and men who spoke loudly about celebrity clients and luxury vehicles they had driven across Beverly Hills and Manhattan. Isaiah simply folded his hands and waited. He didn't join the conversation. He didn't compete. He quietly studied the lobby instead. His eyes drifted toward every entrance, every security camera, every emergency exit, every reflective surface that could reveal movement behind him. It was so subtle that nobody noticed except an elderly janitor pushing a cleaning cart across the polished floor. The old man smiled politely. Isaiah returned the smile with a respectful nod before standing to help lift a heavy trash bag into the cart without being asked. Then he sat back down as if nothing had happened. 30 minutes later, Charlotte Whitmore stepped out of the executive elevator, surrounded by assistants, attorneys, and members of her security detail. At 38, she had built one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in America, and every minute of her day had been scheduled down to the second. She barely acknowledged the line of applicants until her chief of staff leaned closer. "The temporary driver is the last interview before your flight to Boston." Charlotte sighed. "Let's make it quick." One by one, the candidates entered the conference room and left just minutes later. Some smiled confidently. Others looked frustrated. When Isaiah's name was called, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and entered with the same quiet composure. Charlotte scanned his application for less than 10 seconds. "You have gaps in your employment." "Yes, ma'am." "No executive driving experience listed." "No, ma'am." "Why should I trust you with my schedule?" Isaiah didn't rush his answer. "Because I'll treat your time the same way I treat my daughter's." Charlotte finally looked up. It wasn't a rehearsed line. It wasn't meant to impress her. It sounded like something he believed. She noticed the small photograph tucked inside the edge of his folder. A smiling little girl, missing her 2 front teeth, held up a handmade science project beside him. "How old is she?" Charlotte asked, almost without thinking. "Zoe just turned 7 last month." His expression softened for the first time. "She says she's going to build rockets someday." Charlotte closed the folder. Most applicants had spent their interviews talking about luxury sedans, defensive driving certifications, and famous clients. Isaiah had spent less than 5 minutes in the room and somehow reminded her that people still measured success in entirely different ways. She handed the folder back across the table. "Report here tomorrow morning at 6. Temporary position. 30-day contract." Isaiah accepted it with a simple nod. "Thank you, ma'am." He didn't celebrate. He didn't ask about the salary. He didn't even smile until he stepped outside into the cool Chicago air and pulled out his phone. "Hey, Peanut," he said softly after the first ring. "Looks like Daddy found us a job." Isaiah arrived at exactly 5:45 every morning, always 15 minutes before Charlotte's schedule officially began. The underground garage was still wrapped in silence when he completed the same routine without skipping a single step. He circled the sedan once, checked each tire, opened every door, adjusted every mirror, and quietly looked across the concrete levels before settling into the driver's seat. The security officers joked that he treated a luxury sedan like a military inspection, but Isaiah never answered. He simply smiled, wished each of them a good morning, and continued working. By the end of the first week, everyone had noticed something unusual. Isaiah never used the same parking position twice if there was another option available. If one exit looked crowded, he calmly suggested another. If construction delayed a familiar street, he had already mapped 2 alternate routes before the navigation system finished recalculating. Charlotte watched these habits from the back seat with growing curiosity. She had spent years surrounded by experts who loved explaining how talented they were. Isaiah never explained anything. He simply did his job as though excellence required no audience. On Thursday afternoon, they left a meeting nearly 20 minutes later than expected. Charlotte glanced up from a stack of contracts. "Take Lakeshore Drive," she said. "It is usually faster this time of day." Isaiah looked through the windshield for only a moment before speaking. "Michigan Avenue will save us about 8 minutes today, ma'am." Charlotte frowned slightly. "The traffic report says otherwise." Isaiah nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am. But there is a charity marathon setting up 3 blocks ahead. The report has not caught up yet." She studied him for a second before lowering her papers. "All right." 25 minutes later, her assistant looked at the dashboard clock in disbelief. "We actually arrived early." Charlotte quietly turned toward the driver's seat. "How did you know?" Isaiah shrugged gently. "Sometimes the city tells you before the news does." That answer stayed with her longer than she expected. Later that evening, after dropping Charlotte safely at her penthouse, Isaiah drove across town to a modest apartment building where a little girl burst through the front door before he had both feet on the sidewalk. "Daddy." Zoe wrapped her arms around him while holding a cardboard model of a rocket covered in silver paint and glitter. "Look what we built today." Isaiah knelt beside her with genuine admiration. "That is the best spacecraft I have ever seen." She giggled. "It can fly all the way to Mars." "Then we should make sure the captain eats dinner first." They laughed together as they climbed the stairs carrying groceries in one hand and the homemade rocket in the other. Across town, Charlotte sat alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, the lights of Chicago stretching for miles beneath the evening sky. She thought about the quiet driver who never tried to impress her, never asked personal questions, and never treated her wealth differently than her schedule. She realized she knew almost nothing about Isaiah Walker except one simple truth. Every afternoon, no matter how busy the day became, he always checked the time at exactly 4:30 with the faintest smile, as though someone far more important than any billionaire was waiting for him to come home. Saturday arrived without board meetings, investor calls, or airport terminals. Charlotte had planned to spend the morning reviewing financial reports from home until her chief of security called before sunrise. One member of the executive protection team had fallen ill, and another had been delayed by a family emergency. They could still manage the afternoon schedule, but someone would need to drive her to a private planning session at the company's lakeside conference property. Isaiah answered the assignment with his usual calm. "I will be ready in 15 minutes, ma'am." The drive north was quiet except for the soft hum of tires rolling across the interstate. Charlotte worked through spreadsheets on her tablet, while Isaiah kept both hands steady on the wheel. About 40 miles outside the city, he glanced toward a fuel station sitting alone near the highway. His eyes lingered for only a second before returning to the road. "Would you mind if I took the next exit, ma'am?" Charlotte looked up. "Is something wrong with the car?" "No, ma'am." He paused briefly. "I would simply prefer another route." She studied his expression. There was no fear, no urgency, just quiet certainty. "Very well." He exited the highway and followed a 2-lane county road lined with old oak trees and family farms. The route added only a few minutes, but Charlotte noticed something unusual. Isaiah checked the rearview mirror more often than usual, though never enough to appear nervous. He observed reflections in storefront windows as they passed through a small town. At one stoplight, he waited an extra moment after the signal turned green before moving forward. Charlotte finally lowered her tablet. "You always drive like this?" Isaiah smiled faintly. "I always try to notice what everyone else ignores." "That sounds exhausting." "Eventually, it becomes habit." She looked back out the window, unsure what to make of him. Later that afternoon, the meeting ended earlier than expected. While executives exchanged business cards and congratulated one another on another successful quarter, Isaiah stood beside the sedan watching the parking lot in complete silence. A young valet approached him with a friendly grin. "You ever relax?" Isaiah chuckled softly. "Every evening around 6:30. "What happens then?" "My daughter tells me about school." The valet laughed. "That good, huh?" Isaiah nodded. "Best part of my day." When Charlotte stepped outside, she caught the last part of the conversation. There was no performance in his voice, no attempt to sound admirable. He simply sounded like a father who meant every word. On the drive back to Chicago, rain clouds rolled across the horizon, turning the afternoon sky into layers of silver and charcoal. The first drops tapped gently against the windshield. Isaiah slowed the vehicle without being told. "You are always preparing for something," Charlotte said quietly from the back seat. He kept his eyes on the road. "Life has a way of rewarding preparation, ma'am." Charlotte leaned back and watched the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers. She wondered what kind of life taught a man to speak that way. She did not know that every careful glance, every alternate route, every quiet habit had been shaped years before by experiences Isaiah never discussed. To everyone else, he was simply an unemployed father grateful for a second chance. Yet somewhere beneath the quiet manners and patient smile rested a discipline that no ordinary driving school could ever teach. And although neither of them realized it yet, that unseen part of his past was slowly guiding both of their futures. The following Monday began like every other workday, yet something invisible had shifted. Charlotte no longer spent the morning buried entirely in financial reports. Every so often she found herself watching Isaiah through the rearview mirror, not because he spoke often, but because he almost never did. Silence surrounded him differently. It was not awkward. It was steady. It felt earned. During the afternoon, the company prepared for one of its largest investment presentations of the year. Executives hurried through hallways carrying folders, assistants answered nonstop phone calls, and security personnel coordinated arrivals for several important guests. Isaiah parked the sedan beneath the executive entrance and stepped out to open Charlotte's door. Before she reached the building, he paused for only a heartbeat. His eyes drifted toward a delivery truck parked across the street. The vehicle belonged to a local florist, yet something about its position held his attention. After another quiet look, he continued escorting Charlotte inside without saying a word. An hour later, the florist truck had disappeared. Isaiah noticed that too. Most people would never have remembered it had been there at all. As the meeting stretched into the evening, Charlotte's assistant finally approached him with a paper cup of coffee. "You have been standing here for almost 3 hours," she said. "Do you ever sit down?" Isaiah accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "Thank you. I will sit when Miss Whitmore is ready to leave." She laughed softly. "You really take this job seriously." "People trust me with their time," he replied. "That is enough reason." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away inside a small elementary school classroom, Zoe carefully folded a sheet of blue construction paper into the shape of a star. Her teacher walked past and smiled. "Is that for your science project?" Zoe shook her head proudly. "It is for my daddy." "What is the occasion?" "Nothing special." She grinned. "He works really hard every day, so I want him to remember that somebody thinks he is the best." That evening, Isaiah returned home carrying a grocery bag in one hand and exhaustion hidden behind the same gentle smile. Zoe ran toward him before he could even close the apartment door. "Close your eyes." He obeyed without asking questions. Tiny hands placed something carefully into his palms. "Okay, now look." Isaiah opened his eyes and found the paper star decorated with silver crayons. Across the front, written in careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "My daddy always finds the way." He stared at the little gift much longer than Zoe expected. His smile remained, but his eyes grew quiet. "I love it," he whispered. "I am going to keep this forever." Zoe wrapped her arms around him. "Because you always know where to go." Isaiah hugged her gently. "Not always." He kissed the top of her head. "I just keep looking until I find the right path." Later that night, after Zoe had fallen asleep, Isaiah placed the paper star inside the drawer beside his bed. The drawer contained almost nothing. A family photograph, a faded wedding ring that no longer rested on anyone's hand, a folded American flag presented years earlier. And beneath those memories rested a small metal identification tag without any military branch or unit printed on its surface. Isaiah closed the drawer before the moonlight could linger on it for long. Some chapters of his life remained carefully sealed away. He intended to keep them there forever. He had no idea that the quiet past he worked so hard to leave behind was already beginning to move toward him once again. By the middle of the second week, Charlotte's calendar had become even more demanding. A confidential meeting had been scheduled at a private estate along the Illinois shoreline, where several potential partners wanted complete privacy before signing a long-term agreement. The location had not been announced publicly. Only a handful of executives knew the destination, and every guest had been instructed to arrive separately. Early that morning, Isaiah studied the printed itinerary before folding it neatly into the center console. he noticed something that made him pause. The departure time listed on Charlotte's calendar had been revised twice overnight. The destination remained the same, but the sequence of stops had changed. He said nothing. He simply memorized both versions. As Charlotte entered the car, she looked unusually tired. "Long day ahead," she said quietly. Isaiah nodded. "Would you like coffee before we leave, ma'am?" She smiled faintly. "You somehow remember everything. Only the things that matter." They left downtown Chicago just after sunrise. The city slowly disappeared behind them as office towers gave way to neighborhoods, open highways, and quiet stretches of countryside. Charlotte spent most of the drive reading briefing notes while Isaiah listened to the steady rhythm of the tires against the pavement. Then something caught his attention. A dark sport utility vehicle appeared in the mirror several hundred yards behind them. There was nothing unusual about that alone. Highways were full of similar vehicles. 10 minutes later it exited. Isaiah relaxed slightly. 5 miles farther north, the same vehicle appeared again from a different entrance ramp. He watched without changing his expression. Another 15 minutes passed. The vehicle disappeared once more. Charlotte continued reading, unaware that Isaiah had already begun counting distances between exits, bridges, and service roads without consciously thinking about it. Old habits never truly disappeared. They simply waited quietly until they were needed. When they stopped briefly at a roadside cafe overlooking a small lake, Charlotte stepped inside with her assistant while Isaiah remained beside the sedan. He slowly walked around the vehicle, checking each tire, each door handle, each reflection in the windows. A local groundskeeper watering flower beds smiled at him. "Beautiful morning." Isaiah returned the smile. "It is." The older man glanced toward the parking lot. "Funny thing, though. That black sport utility vehicle has passed this entrance 3 times already. They never stop." Isaiah followed the direction of his gaze. By the time he looked up, the road was empty again. "Thank you," he said politely. The words were calm, but his thoughts had sharpened. When Charlotte returned carrying 2 cups of coffee, she handed one through the driver's window. "For the best driver I have ever hired." Isaiah accepted it with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am." She laughed softly. "You still say ma'am every single time. My daughter reminds me that good manners do not cost anything." Charlotte smiled as she settled into the back seat. The conversation seemed ordinary, yet Isaiah quietly adjusted the route before restarting the engine. Instead of following the original road toward the estate, he selected a parallel county highway that reached the same destination from the opposite direction. Charlotte noticed the unfamiliar scenery after several minutes. "I thought we were taking the other road." Isaiah kept his eyes ahead. "This one should be quieter." She looked out the window and shrugged. "I trust your judgment." Those simple words lingered inside the silent car. Isaiah appreciated them more than Charlotte could have imagined. Neither of them realized that somewhere beyond the rolling hills, someone else had also been waiting for that exact destination, believing they already knew which road Charlotte Whitmore would choose. The narrow county highway curved through miles of quiet farmland before opening toward the private lakeside estate where the meeting would take place. Morning sunlight shimmered across the water, and for a moment everything looked almost peaceful. Charlotte closed her folder and glanced outside. "This place is beautiful." Isaiah slowed the sedan as they approached the front entrance. "Yes, ma'am." His answer was calm, but something inside him refused to settle. The estate looked exactly as described in the itinerary, yet the atmosphere felt strangely incomplete. The front gate stood open, but there were fewer staff members outside than expected. Several delivery vehicles were parked farther away than usual. Even the birds seemed unusually quiet. Isaiah parked near the entrance, but did not immediately open Charlotte's door. Instead, he looked across the property one careful time. His eyes paused on a maintenance truck positioned beside a service building. The company logo on the door appeared freshly printed, almost too clean compared to the dusty vehicle itself. A small detail most people would never notice. Charlotte looked up from the back seat. "Is everything all right?" Isaiah answered without alarm. "I would like to use the west entrance instead of the main lobby, ma'am." She blinked. "Why?" "It will only take another minute." Charlotte had learned enough during the past 2 weeks not to dismiss his instincts. She simply nodded. "All right." Isaiah quietly informed the estate coordinator that they would enter through the west garden walkway instead. The coordinator sounded surprised, but quickly agreed. They stepped onto a stone path lined with old maple trees and carefully trimmed hedges. The breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and lake water. Halfway to the conference building, Isaiah suddenly stopped walking. Charlotte nearly bumped into him. "What is it?" she whispered. He did not answer immediately. His attention rested on the empty reflection inside a large glass window overlooking the garden. For the briefest instant, he had noticed movement where there should have been none. He gently stepped sideways, placing himself between Charlotte and the open courtyard without making the gesture obvious. "Please stay close to me," he said quietly. His voice remained steady, almost conversational. Charlotte felt something change. She had never heard that tone before. It carried no panic, only certainty. Within seconds, the estate manager hurried toward them, looking confused. "Miss Whitmore, we have a small scheduling problem. Someone has been asking whether you already arrived." Charlotte frowned. "Who?" "We are not sure. They left before anyone could identify them." Isaiah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Has anyone confirmed today's guest list?" The manager hesitated. "Not completely." Isaiah offered Charlotte a polite smile that somehow made her even more alert. "Would you mind waiting inside the library for a few minutes, ma'am? It overlooks only one entrance." She studied him carefully. "You already knew something was wrong, did not you?" He took a slow breath before answering. "I noticed several things that did not fit together, and you never mentioned them." "Not until I was certain." Charlotte nodded without another question. For the first time since hiring Isaiah Walker, she understood that his constant awareness had never been anxiety. It had been discipline. While the executives believed they were preparing for another routine business meeting, Isaiah quietly began observing every hallway, every doorway, every reflection, every schedule, assembling dozens of ordinary details into one unmistakable conclusion. Whatever had drawn his attention onto the county road had not disappeared. It had simply arrived before they did. Charlotte waited inside the estate library exactly as Isaiah had requested. The room overlooked a quiet garden instead of the crowded entrance, and for the first time in years, she followed someone else's judgment without demanding an explanation. Outside, Isaiah moved through the hallways with the same calm pace he always carried, greeting staff members politely while quietly asking simple questions. Which vendors had arrived first? Which vehicles had entered through the service gate? Whether any last-minute deliveries had been added to the schedule? None of the answers sounded alarming by themselves, yet together they formed a pattern that refused to make sense. One catering van had been checked in twice under two different arrival times. A maintenance crew had reported seeing unfamiliar workers near the loading dock even though no repairs had been scheduled. Most importantly, the florist listed on the visitor log was not the same company whose truck Isaiah had noticed earlier that morning. The estate manager frowned as he reviewed the paperwork again. "How did you even notice this?" Isaiah answered quietly. "Small details usually introduce bigger problems." Before the manager could respond, two county deputies arrived after receiving a request to verify visitor records. One of them stepped through the doorway, glanced toward Isaiah, then suddenly stopped walking. His expression shifted from professional curiosity to complete disbelief. "Walker," he said almost under his breath. Isaiah slowly turned around. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. Then the deputy smiled with genuine respect. "I cannot believe it is really you." Charlotte, standing several feet away, watched the exchange in silence. "You know each other?" she asked. The deputy nodded immediately. "Ma'am, years ago I served with a regional emergency response team. We trained alongside several military instructors. Mr. Walker was one of the people teaching advanced planning and protective movement." Isaiah looked slightly uncomfortable. "That was a long time ago." The deputy laughed softly. "Long enough for you to hope nobody remembers." Charlotte folded her arms. "You never mentioned military experience during your interview." Isaiah met her eyes calmly. "You hired a driver, not a resume." The deputy looked genuinely confused. "You mean she does not know?" Isaiah gave the slightest shake of his head. Understanding immediately crossed the deputy's face. He respected the silence. Still, he could not hide the admiration in his voice. "Ma'am, the habits you have been watching are not ordinary driving habits. People spend years trying to learn that level of awareness." Charlotte felt dozens of quiet moments suddenly connect inside her mind. The alternate routes, the constant observation, the patient pauses before crossing intersections, the way Isaiah always seemed to notice changes before anyone else. None of it had been coincidence. It had been training refined through years of discipline. Before she could ask another question, the deputy's radio crackled with an update confirming that several visitor credentials required additional verification before anyone entered the main conference hall. The deputy turned back toward Isaiah. "Looks like your instincts were right again." Isaiah simply nodded. "Let us make sure everyone gets home safely today." Charlotte watched him walk toward the entrance without the slightest hint of pride or self-importance. He had carried extraordinary experience in complete silence, never once using it to earn admiration, demand authority, or impress anyone. In that quiet moment, she realized the greatest strength she had ever witnessed was not hidden in his past. It was hidden in the humility with which he carried it every single day. The meeting concluded later that afternoon with nothing more dramatic than revised contracts, polite handshakes, and a promise that every visitor credential would be reviewed before future events. Most of the executives dismissed the unexpected security concerns as an administrative mistake. Charlotte could not. On the drive back to Chicago, the silence inside the sedan felt different from every silence they had shared before. It was no longer filled with unanswered questions. It was filled with respect. She watched Isaiah through the rearview mirror as the late afternoon sun stretched across the highway. He drove exactly as he always had, calm hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes moving naturally between the road ahead and the mirrors around him. Nothing about him had changed. The only thing that had changed was what she now understood. After nearly an hour, Charlotte finally spoke. "Why did you never tell me?" Isaiah kept his attention on the road. "Because my past is not my profession anymore, ma'am. Most people would have led with it." He smiled faintly. "Most people are trying to become someone. I am simply trying to be Zoe's father." The answer settled quietly between them. Charlotte looked out the window, watching fields give way to neighborhoods as they approached the city limits. She had spent years surrounded by people eager to advertise every accomplishment, every award, every connection that might open another door. Yet the man sitting only a few feet away had hidden the greatest chapter of his life because he believed it no longer defined him. That evening, after Isaiah dropped Charlotte at her penthouse, she surprised herself by asking a question she normally would have considered far too personal. "Would it be all right if I met your daughter someday?" Isaiah looked genuinely surprised. "I think she would like that, ma'am. Only if you are comfortable." He nodded gently. "She enjoys meeting kind people." Charlotte smiled as she stepped from the car. "Then I hope I qualify." The next Saturday afternoon, she arrived at a neighborhood community science fair carrying a small gift bag. Instead of a business portfolio, Isaiah had reluctantly agreed after Zoe insisted that everyone should see her homemade rocket display. The event occupied a local elementary school gymnasium filled with cardboard planets, baking soda volcanoes, and excited children explaining impossible inventions with complete confidence. Charlotte stood quietly beside Isaiah as Zoe proudly demonstrated how her paper rocket could launch using nothing more than a balloon and a drinking straw. "Watch this," Zoe announced. The little rocket zipped across the string stretched between two chairs, and she threw both hands into the air as though she had reached the moon. Charlotte laughed without thinking. It was the kind of laugh that had become rare in her life. Later, while the children received participation ribbons, Charlotte noticed the familiar paper star tucked carefully inside Isaiah's wallet when he reached for a few dollars at the snack table. The edges had become slightly bent, but it remained protected inside a clear sleeve. She recognized the careful handwriting. "My daddy always finds the way." Isaiah noticed her looking and smiled with quiet pride. "Best award I have ever received." Charlotte felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. She had spent years collecting trophies displayed behind glass walls in executive offices. Yet somehow a folded paper star made by a 7-year-old girl carried more meaning than all of them combined. For the first time in a very long while, she understood that true success was not measured by the size of a company or the height of a skyline. Sometimes it was measured by whether one small child believed, without the slightest doubt, that her father would always help people find their way home. Autumn settled over Chicago one quiet afternoon as Isaiah parked outside Whitmore Global for what seemed like another ordinary workday. The building behind him reflected the golden light of the setting sun, and employees hurried home carrying laptops, coffee cups, and plans for the weekend. Charlotte stepped into the back seat with a tired smile instead of another stack of contracts. "Home?" Isaiah asked. She looked out the window for a moment before answering. "Actually, Would you mind one small stop first? Of course, ma'am. She handed him a folded piece of paper with a neighborhood address only a few miles away. It was Zoe's elementary school. The annual family science night had awarded every child another ribbon, and Charlotte had quietly sponsored new laboratory equipment for the classrooms without placing her company's name anywhere on the donation. She insisted the gift remain anonymous. Inside the school gymnasium, children laughed while parents admired homemade inventions and colorful posters. Zoe spotted Isaiah first, then noticed Charlotte walking beside him. Her face brightened immediately. "Miss Charlotte." She ran over holding another paper creation, this time shaped like a compass. "I made this because Daddy says the best people help others find the right direction." Charlotte knelt beside her. "That is beautiful." Zoe smiled proudly before placing the paper compass into Charlotte's hands. "You can keep it. Daddy says gifts mean more when you share them." Charlotte looked toward Isaiah. He simply shrugged with a quiet smile. "She teaches me something new every day." Driving home later that evening, Charlotte held the paper compass carefully on her lap, as though it were made of glass. "You know," she said softly, "I spent years believing leadership meant always being the strongest person in the room." Isaiah glanced into the mirror. "And now?" She smiled gently. "Now I think it means making everyone around you feel safe enough to become their best." Isaiah nodded once. "That sounds like real leadership." A few days later, Charlotte called Isaiah into her office. The skyline stretched behind her windows, but for the first time it no longer seemed like the most important thing in the room. She placed a new employment agreement on the desk. "I would like you to stay permanently," she said. "Not because of your past, not because of your experience, because of the man you choose to be every day." Isaiah looked at the contract, but did not reach for it immediately. "There is one condition," he said. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "I leave every afternoon in time to pick up my daughter from school." Charlotte smiled. "I was hoping you would say that. It is already written into the schedule." Isaiah finally accepted the agreement. No celebration followed. No dramatic speech. Just a quiet handshake built on mutual respect. As he left the office, Charlotte unfolded the little paper compass once more. Across the back, written in careful second-grade handwriting, were 6 simple words. "Good people always help people home." Charlotte looked toward the closing office door and realized that the greatest thing Isaiah Walker had ever protected was never a company, a fortune, or even a career. It was the simple belief that kindness, carried with quiet strength, could still change another person's life. And perhaps that was the bravest mission of all.